Georgia's 22 season is going to start off with the Dogs ranked number 3 in the country. Do you think that's right, wrong, about right? You tell me. And we're going to talk about this just for a little bit here on dogpost.com. Make sure you go onto the website. This is uh, believe it or not, this is only the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8th time in school history that Georgia has started the season in the top 5. That's happened the last 4 seasons. They have finished in the top 5 13 times. So, they have finished in the top 5 3 times since 2017. Obviously, the culmination of that being the national championship win in 2021. They played for the national championship in 2017. The ranking, according to the coaches, I'll go backwards. Houston, Ole Miss, Arkansas, Cincinnati, Kentucky at 21, and then Wisconsin at 20, Wake Forest at 19, Texas. I'm not sure what they've done to earn a ranking, but they're at 18, Miami at 17, Pittsburgh 16, USC at 15. So you've got the two of the teams that are kind of hard to figure out in Miami and USC at 15 and 17. Michigan State at 14, NC State 13, Oregon 12. So the Dogs will only play 2 teams ranked to start the season. That's Oregon, the Oregon Ducks, and Kentucky Wildcats. Oregon at 12, Oklahoma State at 11, Baylor at 10, OU at 9, Utah at 8, Texas A&M at 7, Michigan at 6, Notre Dame at 5, Clemson 4, Georgia 3, Ohio State 2, and Alabama 1. So what we talked about a lot, for those of you who have been watching, is the difference between Georgia, Ohio State, and Alabama. The only 3 teams that got number 1 rankings were Alabama with 54 of them, then Georgia with 6, Ohio State with 5. No one else received. Oh, excuse me, Texas for some reason. Someone must have clicked the wrong button. Received a number 1 ranking from a coach. And then, Ohio State and Georgia are separated by 22 points, which is means that barely, but consistently, people have probably had Ohio State at 2 and Georgia at 3. But those two are not separated by much. The difference in the points from Georgia to Clemson is about 200 points. So 22 points separates Ohio State and Georgia, 200 from Clemson, and then Notre Dame is about 250 from the Dogs, something like that. I'm doing the math pretty quick here, but when you look at this, the thing that jumps out the most to me is no Florida, no LSU, no Tennessee, as much as we've heard about the Vols. Penn State is not in here. Iowa, Auburn. Certainly a lot of the teams I just talked about are teams, perhaps not Tennessee, but have been ranked in the top 10 recently. If you're Florida State and you get one person voting you in the top 25 and you're outvoted by Coastal Carolina, the powers that used to exist in college football, they're not there right now. I mean, with the exception of a few. I mean, obviously Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia, Notre Dame, Michigan, these are sort of traditional powers. But Florida, Tennessee, Nebraska, Auburn, LSU is not ranked coming into a season. I mean, that is hard to understand, and you understand why they're not ranked coming into a season. That makes plenty of sense. But a season ago, your top 5 was Alabama, Clemson, Oklahoma, Ohio State, and then the Dogs at number 5. Uh, these idiotic schools were also included in the top 10. Iowa State and North Carolina. The Gators were at 11 last year. LSU was at 13. So USC comes into the same year. It comes into the season a year later, basically ranked in the same spot. Indiana was ranked. Texas is ranked basically where they were last year. Miami is basically ranked where they were last year. Thankfully, the idiots that voted in this thing did not put Coastal Carolina or Louisiana Lafayette in the top 25 like we were subjected to a season ago. I don't know why we do that. It's so silly to talk about those teams being legitimately ranked in the top 25, but whatever. So Clemson, I think, is the highest mover up because they're at 4 and they started at 16. So that's kind of curious movement. I wonder what makes people put them so high when things have not necessarily changed, and yet Kentucky, who was ranked 15th a season ago, is at 20 now. So we'll just see. I mean, I don't know. When I look at these things, it doesn't really vary from what I've talked about a lot. I think there is a big difference between the first three teams that we talked about and the everybody else world. But we'll just see. Hey, listen, make sure you're picking up Dawgstruction. I have 10% of the order remaining of these magazines. They are going to run out before the season. Okay, so get them now. They will be gone shortly. Pick up Dawgstruction today and you will get both. And I say today, I mean today, because I have 10% of the magazine orders that I have remaining. You will be able to pick these both up in Red Zone here soon, but we might not make it to opening weekend with the magazine. In fact, I'm skeptical we will, but go ahead and order them now. These are great publications, but I'm not reordering. I mean, when I just look at this, and we talk about who are the teams to watch. For me, it seems like Alabama, Ohio State, and Georgia, as we've discussed many times, are the three teams that most folks are. I talked with somebody who I trust and has covered sports for a long time, and his view was, if Georgia and Bama don't get to Atlanta undefeated, they'd be a little surprised. They don't want to hear about how tough it can be. I mean, and if you look at the rankings based on what these coaches are suggesting, the SEC ain't so hot this year, right? I mean, you got Alabama, Georgia, Texas A&M ranked in the top 7, so half of the top 7. But then after that, there's not a lot of mid-level schools. I mean, Kentucky at 21 just coming is probably a little low. All right. I mean, why do you have Texas in front of Kentucky? I don't understand that. To just generally speaking, and then you've got Arkansas and Ole Miss. So there's 6 teams, if my math is right, in the top 25. But we've had several seasons where the SEC has really been had 7 teams or 8 teams in the top 25 to start the year. The Gators are not in there. South Carolina, Tennessee, Missouri is not in there. Nevertheless, LSU and Auburn. I mean, LSU and Auburn should be ranked in the top 25 every year, no matter what, and they're not. So I don't think that's going to continue with LSU. Now, I don't know how long it's going to take, but I don't think that's going to continue with LSU. So I look at NC State; they got a lot to prove here. But this this opportunity for Georgia is to get to Atlanta undefeated. The result of the game in Atlanta is irrelevant. We've seen that from the 17, well, from the and to some degree, the 17 game, the result of that game was irrelevant as it relates to Alabama because they didn't play in it. A season ago, you had the loser of the SEC championship game win the national championship. When's the last time a conference championship game participant lost that game and went on to win the national championship? I don't think that's happened, but someone else can maybe correct me. Nebraska got their brains kicked in by Colorado in 01, but they didn't win the national championship. They got their brains kicked in by Miami just after that. So, it's really hard to look at this top 25 and say, yeah, Miami is in the same universe as Georgia, or, the Notre Dame Ohio State game is going to give us a lot to digest as we start the season. Georgia, Oregon is going to give us a lot to digest. Alabama, Texas, is going to give us a lot to digest. And then, honestly, Cincinnati, Arkansas to start the season is going to give us a lot to look at. Utah, Florida. But right now, it does appear that the 3 teams I've been talking about ad nauseum are going to be the teams that are the teams to beat to get into the playoff. I think after that, I would not have Texas A&M number 4, but I wouldn't have Clemson number 4 either, and yet they're at number 4. So Oklahoma. There's a lot of question marks here. It just looking at it off, to me, whereas Clemson probably has the most direct and easiest path, if you want to call it path, if you want to call it that. I'm not sure if I'll call it that, but it may be that the Big 12, it'll be two SEC teams, Ohio State, and a team from the Big 12 or from the Pac-12. I mean, I like Utah a lot, but well, let's see what they do with the Gators. When you look at, the top 10, right around the top 10, there's a cluster of Big 12 teams, OU, Baylor, Oklahoma State, and then not so far from that, and while we try not to giggle, Texas is sitting there at 18. So maybe this is the year where the Big 12 kind of beats its own drum a little bit. I don't know. But we know three SEC teams are not going to get into this thing. That's just really hard to believe. You're telling me that three SEC teams are going to go 35-1 and get in. I mean, that's hard to imagine. So Texas A&M right now seems to me hard to imagine them getting in, but Alabama got into the college football playoff and won it without even playing in the SEC championship. But Texas A&M is not Alabama. Um, my dark horses, or my fourth place teams, perhaps in order, are are this is getting into the playoff now. This is not necessarily the fourth best team. Utah, Notre Dame, Clemson. I'm going to say Baylor, because the physicality of the Bears, you know, there are some teams that are not that bad out there in college football, but I think Texas A&M is getting a little more credit than they've earned, because of that win over Alabama. You just can't follow it up with four losses. And then, I'm just, I love to like stick my eye in Clemson, but I mean, my finger in the eye of Clemson. But come on, NC State, like, why do we believe in you? Why? Because you beat Clemson in overtime? Like, is that enough? You didn't even win the division. So we do see. I mean, I'm not sure. I thought I'd see the day where the SEC or the ACC, um, like Creek division or whatever it is, has more uh, people in it in the top first rankings in the SEC East. But here we are, because you've got Clemson, Wake Forest, and NC State. And someone will have to forgive me if they're not in the same division, because I'll be honest, I can't remember the divisions of the ACC. I don't know if anybody can, but yeah, the ACC's in here. I mean, you got Clemson in here. Notre Dame is a half member, but you got Clemson, NC State, Pitt, Miami, Wake Forest. So that's five ACC teams. That's not the end of the world. I mean, Wake Forest won Clemson's division last year, if I'm not mistaken. So, you have the two teams that played in that for the Peach Bowl appearance, but it just, Ohio State, Bama, and Georgia, they all have some things to deal with. I think the biggest concern is probably Ohio State's defense. Perhaps the second biggest concern is Georgia's replacing their defense, and the third biggest concern is Alabama's offensive line. Those things all seem to me like what could prevent those guys from getting to the playoff, but we'll just see.